When a 3.2 magnitude earthquake struck near Boley last Wednesday, scientists immediately began examining data from the quake. Earlier this year, a study authored by a former University of Oklahoma geologist provided new evidence linking increased seismic activity to oil and gas wastewater disposal wells, with another study suggesting those wells are putting even more pressure on underground fault lines. Researchers are taking another look at a quake which shook the ground near Prague 2 years ago.
Our studio is shaking. You can see it shaking right now. I think this is our second one in a day, and all those aftershocks. Our studio is still shaking. Wow.
It was the biggest earthquake in state history, 5.7 magnitude, that caused widespread damage across central Oklahoma in November of 2011. Joe and Mary Renault, whose home sits midway between Prague and Meeker, won't soon forget that night. The couple was just getting ready for bed,
and all of a sudden a horrendous bang hit the house. It sounded just like an airplane had crashed in the yard, followed by about 45 seconds of tremendous shaking of the house.
It was 35 seconds of terror.
The big mirror in the master bedroom, the glass shattered into hundreds of shards. My wife began to scream, hyperventilating and crying, and I thought she was having a heart attack.
Mary was standing next to the bed when the quake struck.
And I kept thinking, I need to get on the bed. I'll be safer on the bed. I couldn't move. I could not, everything was shaking so bad, I couldn't get my foot off the floor.
In the last decade, central Oklahoma has experienced a swarm of earthquakes, including dozens located along the Wilzetta Fault near the Renault's home. Katie Karanen is a former assistant professor of geophysics at the University of Oklahoma. Karanen, who now teaches at Cornell University, says the quake the Renaults felt came as a surprise to seismologists, since the Wilzetta was generally believed to be a quiet fault.
This is not an area of Oklahoma that we expected to see earthquakes in, although we see earthquakes in quite a few areas of Oklahoma.
After the big one hit, Karanen and a team of seismologists installed monitors in the area and began gathering data to help explain what happened.
The stations that we put out measure small earthquakes that are occurring after the big one that we would have felt. Those small earthquakes happen on the part of the ground that ruptured or broke in the first earthquake. So if we can figure out where those small earthquakes are, then we can actually understand more about what happened during the big event.
What they found is what Karanen calls a spatial correlation between the epicenter of the quake and wells used by oil and gas producers to dispose of toxic wastewater left over from drilling activity, including hydraulic fracturing.
These earthquakes are happening along a portion of the Wilzetta Fault that's within, at most, a couple of hundred meters from injection wells. And these earthquakes, like I said, in depth, are occurring at the depths where water is being injected.
Karanen's research, published in the journal Geology, suggests the earthquakes were most likely caused by injection of wastewater into several deep wells in the Prague area. According to the theory, when large volumes of wastewater are pumped underground, the resulting increase in the pore pressure of the rock and reduced friction holding the rock together causes nearby fault lines to slip, creating tremors that are felt on the surface. Oklahoma Geological Survey seismologist Austin Holland has seen the data and knows the theory, but he's not entirely convinced the wells caused the earthquakes.
Right now, with the data we have, we don't have to have a unique reason to have these earthquakes. They're quite consistent with what we'd expect from the natural seismicity within the region.
Holland isn't ruling out injection wells as the culprit, and in fact puts the odds of a link between the wells and the earthquakes at better than 50%. But Holland takes issue with the claim that the Wilzetta was a dead fault before the 2011 quake.
The chances of having a magnitude 5.6 on this fault based on previous USGS hazard maps and the background seismicity within the region, it was about a 1% chance, or maybe a little less, in 50 years, which is a pretty high probability.
The oil and gas industry has had little to say about a connection between injection wells and earthquakes. One person who has addressed the issue is Gene Antonides, Vice President for Exploration with New Dominion, a Tulsa-based oil and natural gas exploration company. Antonides believes the Prague quake was more likely the result of heavy rains, which added to the weight of underground aquifers following months of drought. By comparison, he says an injection well operated by New Dominion along the Wilzetta Fault only pumps about 3,000 gallons a day into the ground.
You're talking roughly on a daily basis about 950 tons of water versus probably on the order of 84 million metric tons on the water side as far as from the aquifer changes.
That's a hypothesis, but not one that's been, at least in the public realm, followed up on extensively to show that it's a likely hypothesis.
Kiernan believes the link between disposal wells and earthquakes is strengthened by another study she co-authored. That study, in the July issue of the journal Science, found that distant earthquakes, such as an 8.8 magnitude quake in Chile, can trigger smaller earthquakes hundreds or even thousands of miles away at sites which are near disposal wells.
Prague was one of the cases where it was pretty clear that after a large distant earthquake, Prague lit up with many smaller earthquakes preceding these larger ones that we're discussing, which I think very reasonable interpretation is that you already had high pore pressure there building up prior to this 5.7 event.
Other states which have experienced earthquakes near disposal wells have imposed restrictions in an effort to avert future quakes. By contrast, Oklahoma has taken more of a hands-off approach. The State Corporation Commission, which regulates oil and gas drilling, does have rules regarding pollution from disposal wells, but
in terms of induced seismicity and injection wells, there are no rules right now.
Matt Skinner is the Public Information Officer for the Corporation Commission. Skinner says the issue of induced seismicity is an issue that is well established within the seismology community.
Given that, and given what's happened in other states, the issue is what can we adopt for Oklahoma while the research is going on as to oil and gas production and induced seismicity and what, if any, relationship there is. Are there best practices that can be adopted?
The Oklahoma Geological Survey is now working on establishing a set of best practices to reduce the risk of man-made earthquakes. Holland says a workshop earlier this month involving scientists, oil and gas companies, and representatives from the Corporation Commission met to begin drafting recommendations for the industry.
You want to avoid known faults that could be of concern. You want to have a system in place so that if you begin to see earthquakes, you know how to respond to them.
Most of the recommendations are expected to be voluntary, but Skinner says it is possible new rules regarding disposal wells will eventually emerge.
All oil and gas regulation is ever evolving, and it doesn't matter if it has to do with seismicity or protecting groundwater, anything like that. Nothing is ever static. So we expect that no matter what the answer is in this case, it won't be the final answer.
Whatever happens, Joe Renault wants research to continue. He remembers an earlier controversy involving the use of lead in gasoline.
Let's not go through another unleaded gas experience, which, as you recall, it took us 50 years to discover, but that was not good for the environment.
Joe hopes the debate over injection wells and Oklahoma earthquakes won't take another 50 years to resolve.